Parliamentary. Mark's the convener of OSTF and has done a lot of work over many years to not only put our sovereign argument together, but the documents that we have drafted up over the many years have been unrebutted by every court and jurisdiction across this entire country and the planet. So Mark's going to read out the declaration read to the UN in 2013. This was unrebutted and it was read to the full council. It still stands as truth. And his proper name is Ganabadi Jakamara.
So everyone, thanks for coming. My pleasure. This declaration I'll read out, but I'll give you just a bit of a background as to how we managed to trap the Crown. How the Crown managed to belligerently trap themselves into acknowledging before their Parliament, before the world's press, that there's them and there's us. The one thing that they most desperately did not ever want to admit. Now, what happened was when Arthur Phillip arrived at Sydney Cove, before he walked up the beach to make his claim, he stuck his foot in my mum's country, and by doing so, he subjected himself to our law. And our law is such that if you do not have a bloodline connection to country, you cannot own it. He then proceeded up the beach and stuck a rag on a stick in the ground. And as most of us know, if anyone's seen, he put the Union Jack on a stick in the ground, yeah? Yeah. Wrong. The Union Jack wasn't even created until 1801. That's how badly you've been instructed in relation to your history. Okay, that's number one. Number two, they claim that at the time, and we have this in writing from all the Attorneys General, federal, territorial and state, that when Arthur Phillip stuck the stick in the rag in the ground, he took radical title and sovereignty for the King of England. The problem with that is manifold. For example, on 16th of July 1796, the Judge Advocate General of the First Fleet, Captain David Collins, recorded in his journal that he just had a lengthy conversation with Bennelong, who explained to him at that point in time, 8 years after they arrived, how that the tribal people maintained their hereditary title over their estates. So they obviously hadn't taken radical title and sovereignty till then. And then, just as the next major sort of blip on the radar, there's millions of documents in the middle of all this. So, 23rd of February 1836, King William IV issued the letters patent to establish the province of South Australia. And in those letters patent, he had a proviso. And the proviso was that the settlers were not to interfere with the native people's peaceful enjoyment of their own estates. Once again, acknowledging by way of legal instrument within the Parliament itself that the tribes were still the masters of our own realms. Not 1872, sorry, the Crown created the Pacific Island Protection Act. In Section 2 of the Act, it defined that wherever the term other places is used in the Act, it meant the Australasian colonies. 1875, Queen Victoria created an ordering council to amend that Act, and in amending the Act, in Section 6, it was made patently clear to everyone who needed to know that the jurisdiction of the Crown was not to be extended over the native peoples, whether in the Pacific Islands or the other places, meaning the Australasian colonies. And in Section 7 of that amendment, under the title of Rights of the Tribes, it says that the Crown was not allowed to extend or construe to extend sovereignty or dominion into the Pacific Islands and the other places, meaning the Australasian colonies, and that sovereignty and dominion was to remain with the chiefs and the rulers and the peoples of the tribe. Now, for the Parliament to operate, the Parliament itself has a set of rules called Halsbury's Rules. The contemporaneous version for that period of time, from say 1870 to 1900, was Edition 3. Now, if you want to know what we can do with the law of the British Parliament during that period, we go to Edition 3, and if you have a look at page 337, paragraph 559, part 12 and 12.1, at part 12 it says that if they amend any of their law, the only thing they can do is amend it to improve the original intention. They cannot derogate from the original intention of the Act with any later Act. And in section 12.1 it says that they're not allowed to usurp the sovereignty of the tribes here in the Pacific. For example, the Maori assembled in Parliament at Waitangi, and that we are not allowed to usurp their sovereignty. So we bounce forward 25 years to this thing that everyone's worried about, which is the Constitution. There's only 3 letters in that word you really need to take notice of, and it's the first 3. Apart from that, that document relates only to British subjects. It does not relate to Australian citizens. It does not relate to the current Australian Parliament, and it does not relate to the people who own this continent. The reason I say that is because in accord with previous law, namely the Pacific Island Protection Act Amendment of 1875, Section 6 and 7, when they created your constitution, they included in your constitution a section at Section 51.26 that said that they could not make laws for people of the Aboriginal race. Okay, and at Section 127, it said that they could not count us as part of the population of the Commonwealth or any part thereof. The reason for that being, you were not allowed to usurp our sovereignty. You could not count us as part of you. Now, in 1967, there was a referendum, and there was the biggest smoke and mirror con job ever pulled. What happened was that everyone thought that by amending the Constitution that somehow miraculously Aboriginal people were being recognised by the Crown, and that was the end of it. It wasn't even the start. All they did was they removed the mention of their right to not make laws, or their obligation not to make laws for us in Section 51.26, and they removed their obligation not to count us as part of their population in Section 127. The problem with that is that removing the two negative statements did not create a positive environment. And they could not make a positive statement that they could make laws or count us as part of their population because we did not give it to them. So then we had to get the High Court to acknowledge that effectively their Parliament had no jurisdiction over us in our original birthright status. So fiddling around back scenes, there was a lot of documentation written and a lot of documents funneled down to people and matters raised in the High Court in relation to Section 44(1) of the Constitution, the most popular being Barnaby Joyce. But what was proven through those court cases was that any class of Australian has the right to have the Crown acknowledge, or force the Crown to acknowledge their birthright if they don't rescind it. Because as we know, Barnaby Joyce was removed from the Parliament because he didn't know he had New Zealand citizenship, but he had it. He hadn't rescinded it. It was a birthright for him. Well, the fact is that the High Court acknowledged by way of that Aboriginal Australians standing over here as citizens of the Crown also have a birthright over here as in our tribal capacity that they can't take from us. And that birthright is our birthright, our blood connection to our country that they cannot rule, govern or steal from us. And they didn't realise it. Then on the 10th of February 2020, the High Court handed down a ruling in Tom and Love versus the Crown, which said exactly that. These two black fellas, one born in New Guinea, one born in New Zealand, came to Australia. They were about to be deported, but they also had grandparents who were Wiradjuri and Kamilaroi. And therefore, because of their unintentional, but nonetheless legally binding birthright, their blood connection to country, they could not be removed. That gets us to this. What happened in 2010 was we, under instruction from law people in the Central Desert, we created the original Sovereign Tribal Federation as a federation of tribes around the continent who want to stand and recognise each other's song, dance, ceremony, sovereignty, everything. Our lands, each other, the whole lot, and stand against the Crown as a common enemy. Well, what happened was that when we started the recognition process, we wrote to them and told them because we were not recognised in their constitution, we had no recognizance, and therefore there was no binding between the tribes on this side of the fence and the Crown on that side of the fence. We were trying to get them to admit that there was them and us, because by them and us it means that us are first in time. They are second in time. So what happened was that ultimately the Parliament raised the issue. Julia Gillard came out 6 weeks after we issued that notice, and she said that she'd been told by the government solicitors that they had to have a referendum to amend the Constitution to recognise Aboriginal people to bring us under their law. Tony Abbott was quoted as saying, "We have to do now what we didn't do 100 or 200 years ago. We have to bring these people under our law," publicly admitting we are not under their law. But anyway, on the 13th of February 2013, the Federal Parliament held a recognition day, and they entered a recognition bill into their Parliament. And at the moment they entered their recognition bill into the Parliament, the tribes, who are the sovereign member tribes of the OSTF, filed this document into their Parliament as well. Okay, so this is the document that they were served and they were viewed and videotaped on the world by the world's press receiving this document.
you thought I could talk.
Believe me.
That was the last.
Believe me. Believe me, I do not like doing this at all. But this was a declaration of self-determination and nationhood of the autonomous original tribal peoples of Terra Australis. And for those who don't know, we are not Aboriginal. Aboriginal being a compound noun that means not original. We are not Indigenous because Indigenous comes from the Latin indigena, meaning a naturalised citizen of the realm, which we are not. And we are not native, because native comes from the Latin nativus, which means someone born in a condition of slavery or servitude.
Oh.
So we take grave offence to the Crown's native title legislation, for example, where they try and get us to agree that we've traded our land, the term traditional owner coming from the Latin traditio, meaning someone who has traded their land.
So then they're all frauds.
Right?
Yeah. The Aboriginals and the Indigenous, they're all frauds and got
Yeah,
paid.
they are. Excuse me, blinders are bad. To all in singular, to whom these presents shall come. We, the autochthonous and original tribal peoples of the Great Southern Land, the noble peoples of the Great Southern Land known in the modern era as Australia, support and address the United Nations in that we solemnly proclaim the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a standard of achievement to be pursued in a spirit of partnership, truth and mutual respect. And we might say that we only recognise it as the lowest possible common denominator in a level playing field and a respectful playing field to move forward. We don't actually recognise the UN as such. Therefore, in this same spirit and pursuit, we adhered to this proclamation and adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a template only, to claim and declare our sovereignty and nationhood, and all the rights and privileges afforded to nations both within the UN Declaration of Indigenous Peoples and according to our own sovereign status to the world. Most importantly, we do this under our own sovereign status. We, the original tribes of this continent, declare to the world that no matter our geography, tribe, faith or political affiliation, we are united as one people through the Almighty, the Creator of all things. The Creator confirms our brotherhood and nationhood, and with and by the Creator's will and blessing we exist. Terra Australis Ignota, or Terra Australis Incognita, was a hypothesised continent, wasn't even appearing on European maps until the 15th century. However, since time immemorial, for many millennia before it appeared on European maps, this continent had been the sovereign lands of the original tribes. Other names used to acknowledge our continent by various other peoples over the times have been Magellanica, or the land of Magellan, or La Australia del Espíritu Santo, Spanish for the southern land of the Holy Spirit. Terra Australis was one of the several names applied to the landmass of what is now commonly called the continent of Australia. In this declaration, we use the term Terra Australis for the sake of ease only, in reference to this continent. We, the original tribes and sovereigns of Terra Australis, we are, and we hereby declare that we have exercised and are exercising our right to self-determination, having united as a people to create the original sovereign tribal federation so as to unify the tribal peoples under the authority and blessing of the Creator commensurate with our law. We wish to be known as the autochthonous tribes of the originals, and by the short name of the originals. Originals defines the unified joint and several autochthonous original tribal peoples, principalities and provinces of Terra Australis in the geographic region and landmass that lies in the southern hemisphere of this our Mother Earth, between the Pacific Ocean in the east, the Indian Ocean in the west, the Great Southern Ocean in the south, and the Timor-Arafura Seas to the north, and including all islands around the landmass continent within a 200-mile limit to sea. We, the autochthonous original tribal peoples, are the original peoples which are, by way of common treaty between ourselves, the member tribes of the OSTF. Originating and original are the terms meaning autochthonous creation of the Creator or giver of life, but in particular respect of this declaration, these terms mean the flesh and blood sovereign original tribal men, women and children, being from historical and geographical Terra Australis, which are parties to this treaty. We, the Indigenous tribes of Terra Australis, confirm that we are the most ancient autochthonous peoples of this our Mother Earth, and our contribution into the development of humanity is unique, as is our contribution to the maintenance of the most ancient tribal culture, songs, dances, ceremonies, and the oldest surviving law system on the planet. The history of our people can be traced from the birth of time itself to the lands of Terra Australis, the material evidence of which can be found over the original tribal people's territories. The tribal culture and law of this continent are worthy of, and a number have attained World Heritage recognition. It is our belief that our people, our ethnic and tribal customs, our rituals, our culture, our law and our languages have emerged throughout these territories over the past tens of millennia, long before legal history and way before legal memory. Terra Australis, the autochthonous and historical homelands of the original tribal peoples, is the continent referred to in modern times by the term Australia. The most ancient ethnogenetic sources of the original tribes are to be found today in the tribal populations within the original archaeological culture of the continent. Pardon me. Throughout the millennia, the original tribes have lived and loved across this continent, visited irregularly by representatives of the various European and other cultures from across the planet, which we have conducted commerce under, with whom we have conducted commerce under our own terms and laws as the sovereign tribes we were then and remain. Man's ancient customs state that flesh and blood was divided by the Creator into nations and tongues. The original nations, a creation of the Almighty Creator, were crowned by the Creator and granted the ownership and custodianship over Terra Australis by him. Proof of this dignity is the acknowledgement by all the nations of this planet that we are the unquestionable first and autochthonous nations of Terra Australis. We, the original tribes by divine right, are the Creator's assigned owners and legal guardians of and have been since time immemorial. Autochthony being our holy mandate. And that word autochthony, if people don't know, autochthony is when you come from the dust of a place. So autochthonous means from the very dust of the ground. We, the original tribes, by divine right, are the Creator's assigned owners and legal guardians of Terra Australis and have been since time immemorial. Autochthony being our holy mandate, the divine testament of our inheritance, the confirmation of our royal rule to this, the Creator's land, Terra Australis. By the Creator's will, we were created the sovereign autochthonous peoples of Terra Australis with unlimited, inalienable and unassailable rights and freedoms as a people and a nation, and with sovereign authority over our souls and our tribal lands. We have suffered cruel turns of fate. Our tribes have known peace for tens of millennia. This was until the arrival of the British on Duduk tribal lands in 1788 at the place now commonly referred to as Sydney Cove. Since that time, the British have attempted to usurp our sovereignty. They've unlawfully occupied our lands and, with neither consent nor authority, have stolen and interrupted our natural wealth, our sacred sites, our culture, our families and other matters and sites of significance to us. They have done so despite our making it clear to them that this is against our will, against our law and against our culture. They have done so despite being mere guests upon tribal lands and in the process have committed ethnic cleansing on some of our fellow tribes that do not exist to this day. The Crown's parliaments have attempted to illegally disperse and dispossess our peoples across the continent in an attempt to displace us from domicile upon tribal lands in an attempt to justify their fraudulent usurpation of our absolute title and sovereignty over our tribal lands, our souls, and our Creator-granted status upon this continent. We have been pushed out by force from our own lands, and over time the records of our existence are gradually being eliminated and destroyed in a systematic program of genocide and ethnic cleansing. The settlers' parliaments have been waging a war of ethnic cleansing and genocide against the tribes, original tribes, since their arrival on our lands. Our graves are robbed and destroyed by bulldozers, concreted over and flooded with water. Our relics and our sacred and holy sites, our bones and artefacts have been looted, stolen and illegally hidden in collections abroad and in foreign museums, and worse, in the homes of some of the private settlers as monuments to their cunning craftiness in destroying the Creator's longest surviving line of humanity and law. Our people are facing extinction. Our tribes are dying out and our tongues are losing their speech. However, we are the people who are losing our identity, our names, our voice and our nationhood, but we haven't lost them yet. In light of this tragedy, we have gathered together from around the continent in order to remind and confirm the international community of nations and the people in the world in general of our existence, and to demand our claim our nationhood and sovereignty as the autochthonous sovereign peoples, seeking peace, reconciliation, treaty, recompense and freedom from the oppression of the Crown and its greedy corporate warlords. Our people are incarcerated at horrifyingly disparate rates for either no legitimate reason or for disobeying the statutes of a crown which has no right to rule over us as sovereigns. We have taken our future in our hands, and this relates to what's happening here right now, this very second. We have taken our future in our hands. We placed our feet back on the path of self-determination as one autochthonous, original collective, and we have determined our way forward. We respectfully demand that the UN, the EU, Russia, the United States of America, the United Kingdom and Australia in particular, and the international community of nations as a whole, to uphold and defend the rights that are entitled to us under not only our law, but also the various instruments, including but not limited to the UN Charter of Human Rights, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and all other international instruments, laws, covenants, mandates, declarations and treaties in respect to the sovereignty and rights of peoples, nations and human rights, including but not limited to our right to assert and establish our own sovereign and independent states, as recognised by the international community in accord with UN Resolution 262525. But I'll add to that, that's the end of the actual declaration, but I'll add to that one really important point. We want all you guys to stand there with us. The one thing we know is that we can, 100% of us can do this. 2% of us can't, and 98% of us can't. We're the 2% that hold the authority, you're the 100%, 98% that hold the weight. You cannot be free from their tyranny without us, and we cannot share our freedom without you. It's as simple as that. We are free, but we can't exercise it, and we can't share that without you guys. And the one thing that they know is that they cannot disprove one word of what I've said. We have been circulating a document through the judicial system for about 10 years now. It's called the Notice of Rebuttal. Every judicial officer on the continent has been told you do not let this thing into your court. The document destroys their claim to jurisdiction over us. It raises the initial question of how it is that without taking any form of legitimate sovereignty over us, they are exercising their jurisdiction over us. They can't do it. And if you want to get out of their jurisdiction, the only other option is walk away from the fraudulent paper jurisdiction and stand in the real spiritual one, stand in the real tribal jurisdiction. We have to do this together.
I'm going to introduce Bumajin, my brother. Now, he wants to make a special announcement in June. We haven't picked the location or the date, but in June we will be having a national sovereign gathering. We're going to be inviting sovereigns from all over the world to come gather with us in the centre. Okay, and we invite you to come and join us too. And we're going to be doing something there that's well overdue, and I'm going to let Brother tell you what we're going to be doing when we get there.
G'day everyone, I'm Bumajin Gumbangi. We are here with the solution. We're not here to complain anymore. We've served, like Brother said, we've served them, we've rebutted any claims to our land, we've served them eviction notices. Now we've come together, the United Sovereign Nations have joined with the original Sovereign Tribal Federation, that's brought all the nations of Terra Australis together. These are our deeds and titles and our law. And this is your jurisdiction of Terra Australis to come into. So you can walk out of that jurisdiction, off that citizenship, and back on the land where you belong, Terra Australis, with the people of Terra Australis. Stop paying to this corporation. You don't have to pay any rates, any taxes, any land rates anymore. After a month, they'll be all... You're just going to stop paying for a month and they'll be gone. That's it. Everyone in Terra Australis, come back on the land and stand with the original sovereign nations, because we rebutted any claim to national sovereignty, and under international laws, if you've got no national sovereignty, then you've got no standing in law. Yay! Say something earlier on the Declaration of the United Sovereign Nation of the Kangaroo Skin and the original sovereign tribal federation have come together and brought all the nations together. We're starting our international Boer court to charge this corporation with genocide, and the first international Boer court will be held at Uluru. We've been invited by the lawmen, and everyone is welcome to witness the international law court of the Boer courts to bring justice for our people and to charge this corporation with genocide. And everyone's welcome to the Boer court. Yeah, please.
You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me.